California is a geological spectrum. It's a 900-mile strip of coast wedged between the Pacific Ring of Fire and the driest stretches of North America, built on a patchwork of fault lines, floodplains, and imported water that was never meant to support 40 million people. The ground underneath is basically a ticking clock. The San Andreas Fault runs 800 miles through the heart of the state. The Sierra Nevada traps nearly all moisture before it can reach the interior, and the entire Los Angeles basin was once a swamp fed by rivers that no longer exist. With some of the most extreme terrain on the continent, from Death Valley at 282 feet below sea level to Mount Whitney at 14,505 feet, California is America's most geographically schizophrenic and most disaster-prone state. Yet development hasn't slowed. Since 1980, California has racked up more federally declared disasters than virtually any other state. Today, we're counting down 25 times California ignored its own geography and paid the price. From pretty damn insane to the most catastrophic events in American history. Let's get into it. 25. The Salton Sea. California is spending $400 million trying to manage a disaster it created by accident. In 1905, the Colorado River jumped its banks through a broken irrigation canal and spent 2 full years flooding a dry desert basin. The result was the Salton Sea, a 35-mile-long inland lake sitting 235 feet below sea level with no outlet and nowhere to drain. For decades, it was promoted as a resort destination. Celebrities vacationed on its shores in the 50s and 60s. Then came the reckoning. Agricultural runoff from surrounding farms poured in endlessly, loading the lake with salt, selenium, and nitrogen. With no drainage, the water became hypersaline, saltier than the ocean. Fish populations exploded and then completely collapsed. Billions of tilapia died and piled up on the shoreline. With the lake shrinking yearly, its toxic lake bed turned into a dustpan. Windstorms lift selenium-laced dust directly into the lungs of the surrounding Coachella Valley communities. Asthma rates in nearby towns run 3 times the state average. The fix? A $400 million state intervention that engineers described as harm reduction, not restoration. You can't fix an accident this big. You can only manage how slowly it kills. 24. The 2018 Camp Fire. 85 dead. An entire city gone in 90 minutes. In November 2018, the town of Paradise had 27,000 people. By the next morning, it had buildings. On November 8th, a PG&E transmission line failed in 60-mile-per-hour Diablo winds near the community of Concal. The fire that started was ordinary. The terrain it entered was not. Paradise sits on a ridge above the Feather River Canyon, a natural wind tunnel that turns fire into a freight train. In 90 minutes, the town was gone. 85 people dead, 18,000 structures destroyed, 153,000 acres burned. The instant regret was the evacuation plan. Paradise had 3 roads out. During the fire, all 3 became gridlocked simultaneously. Residents abandoned their cars and ran. Some didn't make it to the car at all. PG&E eventually pleaded guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The total damage hit $16.5 billion, making it the most destructive wildfire in California history at the time. The deeper regret? PG&E had flagged that transmission line as a risk years earlier and didn't fix it. An entire American city was erased for the cost of routine maintenance. 23. The Lake Oroville Dam Spillway Crisis. In February of 2017, the tallest dam in America nearly disappeared. The Oroville Dam holds back Lake Oroville in the Sierra Nevada foothills. 3.5 million acre-feet of water sitting above 188,000 people downstream. After years of record rainfall, the reservoir hit capacity. The main spillway was open to release excess water, but a massive chunk of concrete instantly eroded, creating a 300-foot crater. Engineers switched to the emergency spillway, which had never been used in the dam's 50-year history, and was just an earthen slope with no concrete lining. It began eroding immediately. State officials ordered the evacuation of 188,000 residents across 3 counties. The emergency, entirely predictable. In 2005, environmental groups formally warned the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that the emergency spillway lacked concrete lining and was a danger. The warning was rejected. The repairs cost $1.1 billion. The temporary displacement of nearly 200,000 people cost incalculably more. California has 1,400 dams. After Oroville, inspectors found serious safety deficiencies at hundreds of them. 22. Los Angeles' stolen water and the Owens Valley. This one is a disaster so comprehensive it became a movie. In 1913, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power completed the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a 233-mile engineering feat that rerouted the entire Owens River south to a desert city that had no business being the size it wanted to be. What they didn't advertise was how they got there. City agents secretly bought up Owens Valley farmland and water rights under false pretenses, while a booming agricultural community had no idea their watershed was being sold out from under them. By the 1920s, the valley was collapsing. In 1924, desperate farmers broke into and occupied the aqueduct's Alabama gates, letting the water run into the desert for days. Los Angeles sent armed guards. The state sent nothing. By the 1930s, Owens Lake, once the largest freshwater lake in the American West, was completely dry. Today, the dry lake bed is the single largest source of PM10 dust pollution in the United States. The California Air Resources Board estimates the exposed lake bed causes millions in annual health costs for surrounding communities. Los Angeles spends $30 million yearly just suppressing the dust it created by killing the lake a century ago. 21. The 2017 Thomas Fire and the Montecito mudslide. The Thomas Fire of December 2017 burned 281,000 acres across Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, becoming the largest wildfire in California history at the time. But the fire itself was only Act 1. When it burned, it incinerated not just trees and homes, but the root systems that hold hillsides together. It left behind a thick layer of ash that becomes completely waterproof when it dries, called a hydrophobic layer, turning entire mountainsides into concrete slides waiting for a trigger. That trigger arrived January 9th, 2018. A brief but intense rainstorm dumped half an inch of rain on the burn scar in 5 minutes. That was enough. A wall of mud, boulders, and debris up to 15 feet high hit the neighborhood of Montecito at 3:30 a.m. while residents slept. 23 people were killed. 100 homes were completely destroyed. The 101 freeway was buried under 10 feet of debris and stayed closed for weeks. The gut punch: voluntary evacuation orders had been issued for Montecito, but not mandatory ones. And the fire-to-flood connection wasn't communicated clearly enough for residents who survived the fire to understand they were now in a different kind of danger. 20. The 1928 St. Francis Dam collapse. The dress rehearsal nobody learned from. On March 12, 1928, at 11:57 p.m., a 200-foot concrete dam in the Santa Clara River Valley failed completely. The 12.4 billion-gallon wall of water that followed swept 54 miles to the Pacific Ocean, killing at least 431 people and erasing 3 counties' worth of farmland in a single night. The dam had been built by William Mulholland, the same man who designed the LA Aqueduct, against geological warnings from his own team. The canyon walls the dam was anchored to were ancient landslide debris and red conglomerate rock that absorbed water and crumbled. Mulholland had inspected a leak that morning and declared the dam safe. By midnight, it was gone. The disaster ended his career and set Southern California water infrastructure back decades. The real catastrophe was the silence afterward. The victims were predominantly Hispanic farm workers in the Santa Clara floodplain. Compensation was slow and incomplete. The legal doctrine of government immunity meant many families received nothing. Today, chunks of concrete from the dam still sit in the canyon, and the disaster is largely forgotten, a pattern California would repeat many times. 19. The San Joaquin Valley land subsidence. The ground in parts of the Central Valley is sinking at a rate of 2 inches per month, not a typo. California's Central Valley grows a third of America's vegetables and 2/3 of its fruit and nuts. It also sits on one of the most overpumped groundwater basins in the world. Since the early 20th century, farmers have drilled deeper and deeper into aquifers that took thousands of years to fill. The clay layers between them compress permanently when drained, and the ground simply drops. In some parts of the San Joaquin Valley, the land has sunk more than 28 feet since the 1920s. The Friant-Kern Canal, a critical piece of state water infrastructure, has sunk so badly in places that water can no longer flow through it by gravity. California spent $500 million to repair it. The instant regret is that subsidence is largely irreversible. You can refill an aquifer, you cannot uncompress clay. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014 began regulating pumping for the first time in California history. The question now is whether the regulation came 60 years too late. 18. The Northridge earthquake. In the early morning hours of January 17, 1994, the San Fernando Valley was reminded that Los Angeles is built on top of a fault system so complex, geologists are still mapping it. The Northridge earthquake hit at 4:31 a.m. at magnitude 6.7. Powerful, but not even the big one geologists fear. Yet the damage was catastrophic. 57 dead, 9,000 injured, over 20,000 people displaced, $25 billion in damage. The freeway collapse at the Gavin Canyon interchange became a symbol of instant regret. The overpass had been retrofitted for earthquakes years earlier. The retrofit worked. The adjacent sections that hadn't been retrofitted yet, those came down. An estimated $30 billion in additional retrofitting needs statewide were identified after Northridge. California then passed some of the most aggressive seismic safety legislation in the nation. But 30 years later, thousands of soft-story apartment buildings, the most vulnerable to collapse in a quake, are still waiting for mandatory retrofits in cities across the state. The big one hasn't arrived. The preparation hasn't finished. 17. The 2020 Creek Fire and the helicopter rescues. On Labor Day weekend 2020, the Creek Fire exploded in the Sierra National Forest near Fresno and found 5,000 people camping directly in its path. The fire behavior was unlike anything California had documented. An explosive pyroconvective column, essentially a fire-generated thunderstorm, collapsed and sent embers racing miles ahead of the main front. 3 campgrounds were cut off simultaneously. Roads burned. Cell service went down. Hundreds of campers fled to Mammoth Pool Reservoir and stood knee-deep in water as the forest burned around them. The National Guard launched emergency nighttime helicopter missions into active fire conditions, an operation described as some of the most dangerous flying rescuers had ever attempted. 214 people were pulled out. 1 person died. The instant regret was the fire danger rating that weekend. The Forest Service had closed other forests in the region due to extreme fire danger. The Sierra National Forest, where 5,000 people were camping, stayed open. After the rescue, the forest was closed indefinitely. 16. The Bay Area's liquefaction problem. San Francisco's Marina District was one of the most scenic neighborhoods in America when the Loma Prieta earthquake hit in October 1989. It was also built entirely on landfill made from debris dumped into the bay after the 1906 earthquake. When the shaking hit, the saturated fill behaved exactly as geologists predicted and had warned for decades. It liquefied. Solid-feeling ground turned briefly into a fluid. Buildings sank and tilted. Gas lines snapped and ignited. The marina burned for days while firefighters struggled with broken water mains. 3 people died in the district alone. The painful geography lesson: a large portion of San Francisco, Oakland, and dozens of Bay Area cities are built on bayfill, marshland, and soft sediment. The USGS has mapped every square foot of it. The maps clearly show which neighborhoods liquefy in a major quake. Development in those zones has continued anyway. The estimated damage from a major Hayward Fault rupture, which is overdue, runs to $82 billion, with liquefaction accounting for a disproportionate share of projected losses. 15. California's wildland-urban interface. The state is burning itself to sleep. In 1990, roughly 800,000 California homes sat in what fire scientists call the wildland-urban interface, where development meets fire-adapted ecosystems. Today, that number is 2 million homes. California has approved more construction in high fire hazard zones in the past 20 years than any other state. The regulatory mechanism to stop it barely exists. Counties can override the state fire maps. Developers have lobbied against mandatory fire-resistant building requirements. Insurance companies figured out the math first and have been fleeing the state. Since 2019, 7 of the 12 largest insurance companies in California have either paused or non-renewed homeowner policy statewide. The state's insurer of last resort, the FAIR Plan, has grown from a safety net into the primary insurer in dozens of fire-prone communities, despite being structurally designed for limited exposure. The insurance market collapse is the financial system catching up to this geography. The 2025 Los Angeles fires alone, with preliminary damage estimates exceeding $150 billion, made the reckoning impossible to ignore. 14. The Los Angeles River channelization. In 1938, the Army Corps of Engineers paved the Los Angeles River, all of it. After catastrophic floods that year killed 115 people and caused $78 million in damage, the Corps turned a living river ecosystem into a 51-mile concrete flood control channel. Straight walls, concrete bottom, designed for one purpose: move water to the ocean fast. It succeeded. It also eliminated one of Southern California's only sustainable native water sources, drained the last of the region's riparian ecosystem, and made Los Angeles even more dependent on imported water to survive. The instant regret took 50 years to fully materialize. Stormwater that previously soaked into groundwater basins now races to the Pacific, taking topsoil and pollution with it. LA gets roughly 15 inches of rain annually, but captures almost none of it. The groundwater basins underneath the basin are chronically under-recharged. In 2015, LA committed to capturing 50% of its local water supply by 2035. That would require partially depaving and naturalizing the river. The project cost is estimated in the billions. The original channelization cost $71 million. Depaving the river costs considerably more than not paving it. 13. The Cajon Pass Fire Corridor. Interstate 15 through the Cajon Pass is Southern California's jugular vein, the single link between the Los Angeles basin and the desert interior, carrying 300,000 vehicles daily. It's also a natural wind tunnel that funnels Mojave Desert air into Fire County at 80 miles per hour. In July 2016, the Blue Cut fire started near the freeway. Within hours, it had burned 36,000 acres and shut down the 15 completely, the first closure of that freeway in modern history. 82,000 people were forced to evacuate. The towns of Wrightwood, Phelan, and Cajon were threatened simultaneously, but the real exposure was the freeway itself. There is no alternate route for trucks carrying goods from the nation's busiest port complex at Long Beach. Supply chains from the Inland Empire, the logistics hub for the western United States, freeze. A study after Blue Cut estimated a full closure could cost $1 billion per day in economic disruption. The pass has burned before. It will burn again. The freeway's alternate route plan still doesn't exist. 12. The 2011 to 2017 drought and the tree die-off. Between 2011 and 2017, California experienced its worst drought in 1,200 years, a number pulled not from weather records, but from tree rings and sediment cores that revealed how rare even this drought was in geological time. By 2016, 102 million trees had died across the Sierra Nevada. Not millions, 102 million. USDA aerial surveys found entire mountain ranges simply turn brown. The trees weren't just dying from thirst. A bark beetle native to California's forests, normally kept in check by cold winters and tree resin, exploded in population because warm, stressed trees couldn't fight back. Millions of acres of standing, dead timber became the kindling for the fire seasons that followed. The 2018 Camp Fire, the 2020 Creek Fire, the 2021 Calder and Dixie fires. They burned through drought timber. The drought didn't just kill trees, it loaded a gun that the next decade of fire seasons has been firing continuously. 11. The 2025 Los Angeles firestorm. There have been LA fires before. This was different. In January 2025, a historic wind event, Palisades, Eaton, and multiple other simultaneous fires hit a metro area of 10 million people already reeling from years of drought. The Palisades fire became the most destructive in California history, burning through the Pacific Palisades, Altadena, and surrounding communities. Over 12,000 structures were destroyed in the first wave. Celebrities, teachers, and unhoused people lost everything in the same footprint. The instant regrets compounded. A key fire hydrant reservoir serving Pacific Palisades had been offline for maintenance. Water pressure dropped when it was needed most. Evacuation routes through canyon communities gridlocked almost immediately. Preliminary damage estimates from multiple agencies settled above $150 billion, making it potentially the costliest urban disaster in American history. The fires burned in areas that had been mapped as extreme fire hazard zones for decades. Development had continued without interruption. 10. The Colorado River Compact and the Empty Promise. 7 states, 1 river. A math problem nobody wanted to solve, honestly. In 1922, Western states signed the Colorado River Compact, dividing water rights to a river measured during one of the wettest decades in the past 500 years. They allocated 17.5 million acre-feet annually. The river's actual average flow is closer to 12 million. The error wasn't a rounding issue. They divided 50% more water than existed. California received the largest single state allocation. For decades, it used every drop and then some. Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Tucson grew into desert megacities on the same math. By 2022, Lake Mead, the Colorado River's primary reservoir and the water supply for 25 million Americans, had fallen to 27% capacity, the lowest level since it was filled. The Bureau of Reclamation declared the first ever water shortage on the river, triggering mandatory cutbacks in Arizona and Nevada. California's powerful agricultural interests, which hold the oldest water rights, were largely exempted. The bill for a century of overcommitting is coming due in slow motion, a 100-year reckoning measured not in a single disaster, but in a continent slowly running dry. 9. Leaking underground storage tanks and the MTBE crisis. In the 1990s, California added a fuel additive called MTBE to gasoline to reduce air pollution. The logic was solid, the execution wasn't. MTBE is water-soluble and highly mobile in groundwater. It's also a probable human carcinogen. California had an estimated 10,000 leaking underground storage tanks at gas stations statewide, a chronic problem that had never been fully addressed. When MTBE entered the equation, those leaks became a groundwater emergency. By 1999, MTBE had contaminated drinking water supplies in communities across the state. The smell threshold for MTBE in water is 5 parts per billion, far below the concentration that causes health effects, but enough to make water undrinkable. Governor Davis issued an executive order banning MTBE in 2003. The cleanup cost estimated at $3 billion. The The deeper regret, the leaking tank problem that made MTBE dangerous was already documented and underfunded when the additive was introduced. The state stacked a new chemical risk onto a known contamination infrastructure without fixing the infrastructure first. 8. The San Joaquin Valley Fog and Valley Fever. California's Central Valley grows $50 billion in agricultural product annually. It also has air quality that routinely rivals Beijing. The valley is a natural bowl, 450 miles long, 50 miles wide, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, and the geography that makes it fertile traps everything else too. Winter inversions settle cold air at the surface, creating Tule fog so dense that the National Weather Service issues zero visibility warnings for hundreds of miles of freeway simultaneously. In December 2021 alone, a chain reaction crash on Highway 99 involving 60 vehicles killed 2 people. The valley also happens to be the epicenter of valley fever, a fungal disease caused by coccidioides spores that live in the soil. Disrupted soil from agricultural operations, constructions, drought, and wind releases spores into the air. California reported 9,000 valley fever cases in 2022. Nearly double the number from a decade earlier. Climate change is expanding the geographic range of coccidioides northward. The geography that made the valley America's breadbasket also made it a lung disease corridor. Nobody advertises that part. 7. The Rancho Palos Verdes land crisis. This one is still happening. The Palos Verdes Peninsula juts into the Pacific south of Los Angeles, one of the most coveted addresses in Southern California, with ocean views, multi-million-dollar homes, and a geology that has been slowly sliding towards the sea for centuries. The peninsula sits on ancient marine sediment, above unstable clay layers that absorb water and compress. The hillsides have always moved. Geologic maps, made before a single home was built, showed the entire area as an ancient landslide. Development happened anyway. By 2024, land movement in the Altamira landslide zone accelerated to inches per week, eventually feet per month. Utilities were shut off to hundreds of homes. The city declared a local emergency. Homeowners who paid $3 million for their properties couldn't sell them, couldn't insure them, and couldn't live in them. The estimated public cost of stabilization and infrastructure repair has been placed in the hundreds of millions, with no guarantee that stabilization is even possible. Geologists who have been warning about this for decades watch the slow disaster unfold on the evening news exactly as their models predicted. 6. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the fire. The earthquake itself lasted 45 to 60 seconds. What followed lasted 4 days. On April 18, 1906, a rupture along the northern San Andreas Fault hit San Francisco with an estimated magnitude of 7.9 at 5:12 a.m. The shaking collapsed thousands of buildings. Then the gas mains broke. Then the fires started. San Francisco's water system, famously undersized and fragmented, failed almost immediately. Firefighters had no water. The city burned. Over 3 days, 28,000 buildings were destroyed in a fire that consumed 4.7 square miles of the city. Between 700 and 3,000 people died. The uncertainty itself is a record of the chaos. The instant regret stretched back decades. Engineers had warned that San Francisco's water system couldn't fight a post-earthquake fire. City officials had tabled the infrastructure proposals. The deeper regret was geographic denial. The entire city was rebuilt on the same faults, in the same filled-in bay margins, with only marginally improved infrastructure. The Hayward Fault, which runs directly under the East Bay's most densely populated neighborhoods, is statistically overdue for a magnitude 6.8 or greater event. 100 years of urban growth has been placed on top of it. 5. The 1971 Sylmar earthquake in the Veterans Hospital. On February 9, 1971, a 6.6 magnitude earthquake struck the San Fernando Valley at 6:01 a.m. The shaking lasted 12 seconds. What collapsed in those 12 seconds included 2 freeway interchanges, a newly constructed hospital, and the Veterans Administration Hospital in Sylmar, a building that had just undergone renovation. In the VA hospital, 47 people were killed, mostly patients in their beds, when the unreinforced masonry building pancaked. The instant regret was that the VA hospital had flagged structural vulnerabilities before the earthquake. The renovations had been cosmetic, not seismic. The newly built Olive View Hospital also partially collapsed, despite being just months old. It had been built under building codes that geologists had already argued was insufficient for the region's known seismic risk. California rewrote its hospital's seismic safety laws after Sylmar. In 1994, Northridge hit, and several hospitals lost power or structural integrity anyway. In 2030, California's deadline for full hospital seismic compliance arrives. As of 2024, hundreds of hospital buildings still don't meet the standard. 4. The Carr and Zog fires in Shasta County. 2 fires, same geography, same lesson, ignored twice. The Carr Fire of July 2018 started from a blown-out trailer tire near Redding, California. By the time it was contained, it had killed 8 people, destroyed 1,079 homes, and produced what meteorologists confirmed was a fire tornado, a rotating column of flame with 143-mile-per-hour winds that generated its own lightning. The Zog Fire of September 2020 started in the same Shasta County region and killed 4 people in the first day, primarily because residents either received no evacuation warning or received it too late. PG&E equipment was found responsible for igniting both fires. PG&E had been found responsible for the Camp Fire. PG&E had been found responsible for the 2017 North Bay fires. The company filed for bankruptcy in 2019. It emerged from bankruptcy in 2020. The Zog Fire started 4 months later. The legal and financial cycle of utility-caused fires, bankruptcy, reorganization, and subsequent fires has become as predictable as the wind events that spread them. The geography hasn't changed. The utility infrastructure running through it has improved only incrementally. 3. The Central Valley Flood of 1862. The Arc Storm Scenario. California has a catastrophic flood in its recent geological past that most residents have never heard of. In December 1861 and January 1861, an atmospheric river, a narrow band of concentrated Pacific moisture, stalled over California for 43 consecutive days. The resulting floods turned the Central Valley into an inland sea 300 miles long and 20 miles wide. 1/4 of California's taxable land was destroyed. The state went bankrupt. Sacramento was submerged under 10 feet of water for months. An estimated 1/3 of all property in the state was lost. The cattle industry, California's economic backbone at the time, was almost entirely wiped out. This was not a freak event. Geologic evidence shows similar mega floods struck California roughly every 100 to 200 years over the past millennium. The USGS has modeled a repeat event, which they call the Arc Storm Scenario, and found it would cause $725 billion in damage in today's California. That's 3 times the damage of a major San Andreas earthquake. The Central Valley, the same agricultural basin where $50 billion in food is grown annually, sits almost entirely within the historic floodplain. The flood infrastructure protecting it was built for a 200-year storm, not a 500-year one. 2. The Hetch Hetchy drowning and the water monopoly that followed. In 1913, Congress passed the Raker Act, authorizing San Francisco to dam the Hetch Hetchy Valley inside Yosemite National Park. John Muir, who had spent years fighting it, died the following year, many say of a broken heart. Hetch Hetchy was Yosemite Valley's geological twin. Same glacial U-shape, same granite walls, same meadow floor fed by snowmelt. Contemporaries who saw both called Hetch Hetchy more beautiful. It now sits under 117 feet of water behind O'Shaughnessy Dam. The dam created a water system that made San Francisco's growth possible. 2.4 million Bay Area residents drink from it today. The instant regret took a century to fully compute. The O'Shaughnessy system was built for the San Francisco of 1920. By 2023, the SFPUC estimated the aging infrastructure faces an $11 billion capital needs gap. Multiple tunnels pass through active earthquake fault zones. A 2018 study found 1 in 10 chance of total system failure in a major seismic event, which would cut water to 2.4 million people with no realistic backup for months. California sacrificed its most spectacular wilderness to build a water system now too fragile for the population it serves. Both things are true simultaneously. 1. The San Andreas Fault and the city that refused to move. Every disaster on this list traces back here. The San Andreas Fault is an 800-mile right lateral strike-slip fault running the entire length of California. And California decided to build its 2 largest cities directly astride it. Los Angeles sits above a web of faults connected to the San Andreas. San Francisco sits 30 miles from the 1906 rupture zone and directly above the Hayward Fault, which the USGS calls the most dangerous urban fault in America. The science has been consistent for 150 years. The fault moves. The cities don't. The USGS Uniform California Earthquake Rupture Forecast estimates a 60% probability of a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake hitting the Bay Area before 2043. The shakeout scenario for Southern California models a 7.8 magnitude rupture, killing 1,800 people, displacing 250,000, and causing $213 billion in damage. These aren't worst-case scenario projections. They're median estimates. California has invested enormously in seismic retrofitting. It has passed landmark building codes. It has mapped every fault with extraordinary precision. And it has continued to grow its population in the fault zones faster than it has hardened the infrastructure those people depend on. The San Andreas doesn't care about zoning laws, property values, or the price of oceanfront real estate. It cares about physics, and physics is very, very patient.